In the shower, washing blood from my hair after my husband accidentally hit me with a broom over pizza, I heard him whisper, "Next time, don't dodge. Maybe I'll hit your throat." I stayed silent, burning with rage. This morning, my phone lit up with his missed calls. He thought I'd break, but I was planning. His words were the final straw. Now he'll regret ever raising a hand to me. My revenge is coming, cold and precise. So there I was, standing under that scalding hot water, watching pink swirls go down the drain like some twisted scene from a horror movie. The cut on my scalp wasn't deep, but head wounds bleed like crazy, you know? I kept replaying what just happened over and over in my mind while I scrubbed shampoo through my hair with shaking hands. It all started over something so stupid, pizza toppings. Can you believe that? 7 years of marriage and this man loses his mind because I ordered pepperoni instead of his precious mushrooms. I was in the kitchen, just trying to clean up after dinner, when he starts going off about how I never listen to him, how I'm always doing things my way. The broom was leaning against the counter, and before I knew it, he grabbed it and swung it at me like some kind of baseball bat. I ducked mostly, but the handle caught the back of my head pretty good. The sound it made, this awful thunk, still makes me sick thinking about it. But here's the thing that really got me. After I hit the floor, after he saw the blood starting to mat in my hair, you'd think he'd snap out of it, right? Maybe help me up, apologize, something human. Instead, this man looks down at me with these cold, dead eyes and says those words that are burned into my brain forever. "Next time, don't dodge. Maybe I'll hit your throat." I just laid there on that cold linoleum floor, tasting copper in my mouth, while he stepped over me like I was a piece of furniture and grabbed a Bud Light from the fridge, popped it open like nothing happened and went to watch TV. That's when something inside me just snapped. Not the crying, screaming kind of snap, the quiet, calculating kind that means business. I picked myself up, walked to the bathroom, and started planning while I cleaned up the mess he made of my head. See, most people don't know this about me, but I work in IT for a pretty big company downtown. I'm the person who handles all the digital security, passwords, access logs, all that technical stuff. My husband always made jokes about my computer nerd job, but he never really paid attention to what I actually do all day. Big mistake. While I stood in that shower, feeling the last of the blood wash away, I was already 3 steps ahead of him. I knew his passwords, not because I snooped, but because he's one of those people who uses the same password for everything. His mother's maiden name plus his birth year. Real creative, right? I also knew about his side business that he thought he was keeping secret. The one where he sells car parts online using a fake name and doesn't report any of the income to the IRS. He's been at it for 2 years now, making decent money too. Enough to buy himself that new fishing boat he's been bragging about to his buddies. Update 1. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support so far. I can see a lot of you are worried about my safety and asking if I called the police. I appreciate the concern, but you have to understand, this wasn't the first time, just the worst. I've been documenting everything for months now, building my case carefully. But something happened this morning that changed everything. Should I be worried that he's figured out what I'm planning? The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls on my phone. 17. All from him, starting around 3 a.m. and going until about 6. I listened to the voicemails while I sipped my coffee, and let me tell you, it was like listening to a crazy person slowly lose their mind. First few messages were the typical fake apology routine. "Baby, I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me. You know I love you more than anything. I was just stressed about work, you know how I get." But by message number 10, the mask was starting to slip. His voice got harder, more demanding. "You need to call me back right now. This silent treatment is childish. You're being dramatic about a little accident." The last few messages were straight-up threats disguised as concern. "I'm worried about you. You're not thinking straight. Don't do anything stupid that we'll both regret. Remember what happened to your friend Sarah when she left her husband?" That last part made my blood run cold. Sarah was my college roommate who got divorced 2 years ago. Her ex made her life a living nightmare, showed up at her work, followed her on dates, even slashed her tires once. Sarah ended up having to move 3 states away and change her name. But here's what my loving husband didn't know. I stayed in touch. And Sarah had given me some very interesting advice about protecting yourself when you're planning to leave a dangerous man. She told me about lawyers who specialize in this stuff, about how to hide money, about documentation that actually matters in court. I spent my entire lunch break at work setting things in motion. First, I transferred money from our joint savings account to a new account he didn't know about. Not enough to trigger any alerts, just a little here and there over the past few months. By now, I had about $8,000 tucked away. Then, I made copies of everything: his tax returns, bank statements, photos of previous injuries he'd given me, screenshots of his threatening text messages. All of it went into a secure cloud storage account that only I could access. But the real masterpiece was what I did with his little side business. Remember those car parts he's been selling? Well, turns out he's been using our home address for the business, which means I had access to all his customer information, sales records, everything. I spent about 20 minutes creating a detailed report of his unreported income over the past 2 years. Dates, amounts, buyer information, the works. Then I formatted it nice and neat and saved it with all his banking information that showed the deposits he never claimed on his taxes. The IRS has this thing called Form 3949A. It's for reporting suspected tax fraud. Anonymous tip line, they call it. Very convenient. I also discovered something else while I was digging through his computer files. My dear husband had been having an affair with his coworker Jessica for about 8 months. I found emails, photos, hotel receipts, the whole 9 yards. He was even planning to leave me for her, apparently. Had this whole elaborate plan to clean out our accounts and disappear. Too bad I found out first. Jessica, by the way, was married, too. To a really nice guy named Mike who worked as a mechanic downtown. I'd met him a few times at company parties. He deserved to know what his wife was up to, don't you think? Update 2. Okay, wow, this is blowing up more than I expected. Some of you are asking about the legal stuff and whether what I'm doing is okay. I've been working with a lawyer who specializes in domestic violence cases, and everything I'm doing is completely legal. I'm just using information that was already available to me as his wife. But something happened yesterday that has me really spooked. He came home early from work and went straight to his computer. Do you think he knows I've been accessing his files? Wednesday evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard his Chevy Silverado pull into the driveway. He was home 2 hours early, which never happens. Usually he stops at the bar with his buddies after work and doesn't roll in until after 8. I kept chopping vegetables for the salad, acting normal, but I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Through the kitchen window, I watched him sit in the truck for a few minutes, talking on his phone. His face looked serious, angry even. When he finally came inside, he barely acknowledged me. Just grunted something about dinner and went straight to his home office. I heard him boot up his computer and start clicking around, checking things. This went on for about an hour. Then he came into the kitchen, and I could tell something was different. He was trying to act casual, but there was this tension in his shoulders. This way he kept watching me out of the corner of his eye. Hey babe, he said way too friendly. Have you been using my computer for anything? It's acting weird, running slow. I kept my voice level, didn't even look up from the stove. No, why would I? I have my own laptop. Yeah, I know. Just thought maybe you needed to print something or whatever. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, still watching me. You know I don't like people messing with my stuff. I haven't touched your computer, I said, which was technically true. I hadn't touched it. I'd accessed everything remotely through the network. He seemed to accept that, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. The rest of the evening was tense, both of us pretending everything was normal, while dancing around each other like two cats getting ready to fight. That night, I lay in bed listening to him snore and finalized my plans. Everything was ready to go. I had documentation of his abuse, evidence of his tax fraud, proof of his affair, and enough money saved to support myself for several months. I'd already put down a deposit on a small apartment across town, and my lawyer had all the paperwork, ready for the restraining order, but I wanted one more thing. I wanted him to know that he'd messed with the wrong person. Thursday morning, after he left for work, I put the final piece of my plan into action. I created a group email that included his boss, his coworkers, his drinking buddies, his mother, his sister, and about 20 other people from his contact list. The subject line read, "Some things you should know about husband's name." The email was professional, factual, and devastating. I included selected photos of my injuries with timestamps, screenshots of his threatening messages, and a brief explanation of his pattern of abuse. Nothing dramatic or emotional, just the facts. But the real kicker was the attachment, a PDF file titled Tax Fraud Evidence that contained everything I'd compiled about his unreported income. I also included a note mentioning that this information had been forwarded to the appropriate federal authorities. I sent the email at exactly 10:30 a.m., right when I knew he'd be in his weekly staff meeting. Then I packed my bags, loaded up my Honda Civic, and drove to my new apartment. I was done playing victim. My phone started ringing around 11:15. Him, obviously. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By noon, I had 43 missed calls. The voicemails were something else. First came the rage, screaming, cursing, threatening to find me and make me pay. Then came the panic when he realized what the email meant for his job, his reputation, his freedom. The last few messages were pathetic begging, promising to change, asking me to call him back so we could work this out. Too little, too late, buddy. Around 2 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. It was Mike, Jessica's husband. His voice was shaky, but he thanked me for letting him know what was going on. Turns out he'd been suspicious for months, but couldn't prove anything. He asked if I was okay and offered to help if I needed anything. Good guy, that Mike. I also got a call from my husband's sister. She was crying, apologizing for not knowing how bad things had gotten, asking why I never told anyone. I explained that I'd tried to tell her once, about 6 months ago, when he gave me a black eye. She'd brushed it off, said all couples fight. Sometimes suggested I try being more understanding of his stress. Funny how people's perspectives change when they see photographic evidence. Update 3. Holy moly, I never expected this to get so much attention. Thank you all for the kind words and support. It means more than you know. A lot has happened in the past 48 hours, and I wanted to give you all an update. The police showed up at my new place this morning, but not for the reason you might think. My husband tried to file a report against ME, claiming I stole money and invaded his privacy. But here's the crazy part. What happened when the officers heard the full story? Friday morning started with a knock on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers, a woman who looked to be in her 40s and a younger guy, both in uniform. My heart sank. I figured my husband had convinced them I'd committed some kind of crime. I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock attached. "Ma'am, we're here about a complaint filed by your husband," the female officer said. Her voice was professional, but not unkind. "He's claiming you've stolen money from joint accounts and accessed his personal computer without permission. We need to ask you some questions. I let them in, offered them coffee, and sat down at my tiny kitchen table with all my documentation spread out in front of me. I'd been expecting this, honestly. Men like my husband always try to flip the script, make themselves the victim when their world starts falling apart. Before we get started, I said, sliding a folder across the table, I think you should see these. The female officer, her name tag said Martinez, opened the folder and her expression changed immediately. Photos of bruises on my arms, the cut on my scalp from the broom incident, hospital records from when he dislocated my shoulder last year and I told them I fell downstairs. Ma'am, Officer Martinez said quietly, have you filed any reports about domestic violence? No, I admitted. I was too scared, and honestly, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. He's very charming when he wants to be. Coaches Little League, volunteers at the church, everyone thinks he's this great guy. The younger officer was looking through my financial records. These joint accounts? You said you transferred money from them? Yes, small amounts over several months. I was saving to leave him safely. Everything I took, I had legal access to, as his wife. My lawyer confirmed that. That's when I showed them the real bombshell, the recordings. Turns out my phone has this great voice memo app, and I'd been using it every time he started threatening me. 3 months worth of audio evidence of him promising to hurt me, telling me what he'd do if I ever tried to leave, describing in detail how he'd make sure no one would ever find me. The officers listened to about 5 minutes of recordings before Officer Martinez stood up and said, Ma'am, we need to take a different approach here. Your husband filed a complaint, but based on what you've shown us, I think you need to file one too. 2 hours later, I was at the police station filling out paperwork for a restraining order and formal domestic violence charges. Turns out my husband's complaint against me was pretty weak. Accessing a shared computer and moving money from joint accounts aren't crimes when you're married and living in the same house. But threatening to kill your wife? That's definitely a crime. Officer Martinez explained that they'd already been in contact with his workplace after his boss called them about the email I'd sent. Apparently, seeing those photos and reading those threatening messages had convinced his employer that keeping him around might be a liability issue. Between you and me, she said while we waited for the paperwork to be processed, his boss seemed relieved to have a reason to let him go. Said there had been complaints about his temper from other employees. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jessica, the woman he'd been cheating with. She was crying, apologizing, saying she had no idea he was abusive, that he'd told her our marriage was over and we were just waiting to finalize the divorce. He seemed so sweet, she kept saying. He brought me flowers, took me to nice restaurants. I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She was just another one of his victims in a way. But she was also willing to help break up a marriage, so my sympathy only went so far. The best part came Saturday evening. I was settling in with some takeout Chinese food and a Netflix movie when my lawyer called. You're not going to believe this, she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Your husband showed up at my office today with his own lawyer, wanting to negotiate a settlement. A settlement for what? He wants you to take down that email you sent and publicly apologize for damaging his reputation. In exchange, he's willing to agree to a no-fault divorce and let you keep your car. I actually laughed out loud. Let me keep my own car? How generous. It gets better. When I told him you weren't interested in any settlement that didn't include him pleading guilty to domestic violence charges, he started yelling about how you'd ruined his life over a few little arguments. Little arguments? That's what he called them. His lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Apparently your husband hadn't mentioned the physical abuse part when he hired the guy. By Sunday, the dominoes were really falling. The IRS had opened an investigation into his unreported income. His job was officially terminated. Mike had filed for divorce from Jessica and was asking for everything in their settlement. And my husband? He'd been staying at a motel near the highway, calling me dozens of times a day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. The last few were him crying, begging me to come back, promising he'd changed. But here's the thing about guys like this. They don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are until the next time they think they can get away with it. Monday morning brought the best news of all. Officer Martinez called to let me know that my husband had been arrested on domestic violence charges. Apparently, he'd violated the restraining order by showing up at my old workplace looking for me. Security cameras caught him screaming threats at my former co-workers when they wouldn't tell him where I'd gone. The good news is, with his record of threats and now violating a court order, bail is set pretty high, she explained. Unless he can come up with $50,000 cash, he'll be staying put until trial. Considering he'd just lost his job and was about to owe the IRS a whole lot of money, I figured he'd be enjoying government accommodations for a while. 6 months. Later, I'm doing better than I ever imagined. The divorce was finalized last month. Turns out when your husband is in jail for domestic violence and tax evasion, the proceedings go pretty smoothly. I got the house, both cars, and half of everything else, including his precious fishing boat. I sold the boat immediately and used the money to take a vacation to Hawaii. First time I'd been on a plane in 10 years. My new apartment turned into a permanent situation when I realized how much I loved living alone. No walking on eggshells, no wondering what mood he'd be in when he got home, no hiding my own money or making excuses for bruises. I got promoted at work too. Turns out when you're not constantly stressed and exhausted from living with an abuser, you have a lot more energy to focus on your career. Who knew? My husband got 18 months in county jail for the domestic violence charges, plus another 2 years for tax evasion. His new girlfriend, Jessica, moved back in with her mother after Mike took her for everything in their divorce. Last, I heard she was working part-time at a grocery store and driving a 15-year-old Honda with a busted air conditioner. The best part happened about 3 months ago. I was at Target buying groceries when I ran into his mother. She looked embarrassed, ashamed, like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I should have believed you when you tried to tell me what he was like. I raised him better than that, or at least I thought I did." I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, especially about your own kid. "He asks about you sometimes," she added. "Wants to know if you're okay, if you'd ever consider visiting him." I just smiled and pushed my cart toward the checkout. "Tell him I'm doing great," I said. "Better than I've ever been." And that's the truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate scheme or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's just living well, being happy, and showing the world that you don't need someone who treated you badly. My husband thought he could control me with fear and violence. He thought I was too weak, too dependent, too scared to fight back. He thought wrong. These days, I sleep peacefully in my own bed, make my own decisions, eat whatever pizza toppings I want, and answer to nobody but myself. I've got good friends, a job I love, and plans for the future that don't involve anyone who thinks hitting people is an acceptable way to solve problems. As for him, he's exactly where he belongs, learning that actions have consequences and that some people won't stay silent forever. Sometimes I think about that night in the shower, washing blood from my hair while he whispered threats from the other room. If he could see me now, successful and independent and genuinely happy, I wonder what he'd think. Probably that I got lucky. But we both know better than that, don't we? Luck had nothing to do with it. This was just good old-fashioned justice, served cold and precise exactly like I promised.